whole plant-based foods and, all that are considered the fundamentals, which we overlook.
Yeah. What would be for you, Colleen? Like, what are some of the, if someone's out there listening, like, what's the starting spot for someone that does want to create change, especially from a plant-based change, but also that holistic look? Like, what would be your starting point for that, for people to start to bring that into their life?
I think it really depends on the person, because each person I work with has a different starting point based off of like where they're at in their life. And I would say, whatever it is that you're feeling most pulled towards. So if it is
Yep.
nutrition, let's say if it is nutrition, what's one thing that you can change that would be a very small step? Because we want to focus on small steps.
Yep.
They'll add up over time. So whether that maybe is just adding in a salad in the evenings, or maybe it's journaling your food just to bring some mindfulness to it. I have the mentality of like adding in versus taking away, because if we're taking things away, then that can feel very restrictive. So if we can add things in and push the quote unquote bad things out, I don't think there is anything bad, but for this analogy, just kind of pushing things out. And yeah, so just kind of meeting them where they're at, really. And it really depends on the person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Colleen, and I think people would be really relieved to hear that sort of, the idea is it's individual, but to meet that person where they're at and to not overwhelm them with 30 different changes, or to try to make huge and significant changes that overwhelm them and then they can't do it. They fall off really quickly. I think what you're saying is a really sensible approach, that it's a methodical, small step-by-step approach that then creates the big change.
Yes. And that can often leave people with a little bit of anxiety. When I first start working with people, they're like, well, this is the only thing I need to be doing for the next 2 weeks. I'm like, yes, this is, kind of explaining the small step approach, because in the past it was usually following a diet, hardcore until they couldn't anymore, and then they fall off really hard. And it's a whole different mindset, a whole different approach, one that requires slowing down.
Yeah, slowing down. And I always tell people when I talk wellness, and I think what you're saying is the right thing. Like, wellness is a lot of little things done well, and poor wellness is a lot of little things done poorly. And when you've got a lot of poor things, you're going to have a really unhealthy person. If you've got a couple of unhealthy things, which everyone does, like treats and things that they like to do, but you've got a lot of little things that you do that are better, then you're going to be okay. And it's not having everything and having no treats and no rewards, but you need the scale to be heavy on the good small thing side to have overall good wellness. People, I think, find that hard to think, and they think that there's a magic bullet, or that it's just one thing. But it's the food, it's getting to bed on time, it's getting up in the morning, it's getting outside to get some exercise and some sunshine. It's the little things. It's the dessert that you choose 5 days a week that's the healthy choice, so on the weekend you can have that one that you like. Do you see that as being sort of what you speak to at that holistic level, is that constant embedding of little shifts and changes?
Absolutely. Yes. It's those small shifts and changes, and bringing the mindfulness in at all times. And then also knowing that it doesn't have to be perfect too. It's like you said, it's okay to have a cupcake here and there. And it's not meant to be perfect. And in fact, it shouldn't be perfect, because that expectation is impossible to withhold ourselves to. So yes, we need to have some flexibility, but also needs to be boundaries. And it's almost like a Venn diagram of that. And each person's Venn diagram is different, because each person's approach or, meaning of wellness is going to be different.
Yeah. Do you start with that too, in terms of when you work with someone, Colleen, is get a broad snapshot of what wellness looks like to them, like what they love to do in terms of exercise, or what are the things that really make them happy? Is that a really important starting point for you before starting to look at shifts and changes?
Yes, it's really important to look at what their values and needs are.
Yeah.
Because if valuing something that it's really important to them, and then they're not ready to let that go yet, then maybe now is not the time, and maybe down the road that will change, because
Mm.
often things do change and their vision can shift over time. But it's really important to look at the person and see what they're needing and see what their values are. And based off of that, we can make goals and make shifts, because they're going to feel more motivated that way.
Yeah. And have you seen that happen with your clients, Colleen, where like there's been, that they're not ready to go there just yet, but then 6, 8 weeks on, they're like, oh, I want to let's unpack this now because I'm ready for this.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen that time and time again.
Yeah. How does that feel like when you actually, when you get a client like that you that they probably didn't think that was possible, or that was a conversation piece, or that was worth tackling, and again, those small shifts and incremental changes then brings them to a point where all of a sudden that challenge or that opportunity from a wellness perspective becomes possible.
Mm. It's pretty incredible, and it's really rewarding to see. And for me as a practitioner, I come in and come in with a lot of compassion and come in with a lot of love and hold space for them. And I think that in itself is that container that I'm holding for them is a very healing container. And then from there, they're able to make the changes that they might not have thought they could just by me coming in and bringing a lot of compassion and holding space for them. It's incredible what can happen when someone does that for you.
How much do you think of your work that you do, just listening to this conversation, which I'm really loving, is how much is the actual nutritional information that you can give, as opposed to what you just said before, the coaching, the holding space for them to be able to almost find it themselves, and then just steering them in the right direction? Like, what percentages, the stuff you learn as a registered dietitian on here's what you need to eat, as opposed to here's the space for you to find it?
Mm. Yeah, so I think it depends on the person, depending on like what they're needing, what they're wanting. So if they are an athlete and they're wanting really a nutrition heavy focused
Yeah.
approach, and maybe a little bit of coaching, but they pretty much, because they're super high functioning and they're super motivated and they pretty much got it under control to
Yep.
like follow through on their goals, then that person might need a little bit more nutrition. We can look at superfoods and get their labs tested, and look at their tracking to see if their nutrition needs are met. But if someone's coming with approach who maybe wants to lose weight, then that's going to be more of a mindfulness, a little bit less of the numbers. We're taking a lot of the numbers out of it, because sometimes that can feel overwhelming for people, and bring more of the holistic approach coaching for that specific person.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a nice mix. I think if thinking about that, yeah, someone that is an athlete probably doesn't need the wellness stuff as much. That makes a lot of sense. But where someone maybe's fallen off the wagon a fair few times, needs more of the coaching initially up front, as opposed to just being told what to eat. That does make a lot of sense. One thing I wanted to touch on, you've sort of mentioned a few times, is that how important the mindfulness piece is when you're working with a client, especially around food, and probably even with a high functioning athlete, in terms of being really present with what they eat and clear about that. And I say this because I think when people have those treats, or you want the cupcake, for instance, like, my advice to someone is eat it mindfully. Like, really enjoy it, like taste it, experience that treat, because that's the treat that you've decided to have. So that mindfulness becomes really important, that it creates the trigger or understanding that is a reward or a treat, not just an everyday sugar hit anymore.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice. Yeah, having them really sit with it, and have no distractions. Don't have the TV on. Don't be on your cell phone. Don't be in front of the computer. Just sit at the table, enjoy the cupcake, every bite of it, and the flavor and the texture and the smell, and really enjoy that. I think it's great advice to just really be with it,
and then not feel guilty about it, because that was a conscious or a mindful decision to eat that, as it's not just a reactional or emotional decision to eat it, but a conscious sit down and eat it. So I think that's important. How else do you bring mindfulness in terms of your coaching or your nutritional consultations?
So I'll bring mindfulness in, when I've noticed that someone is doing some emotional eating, some stress eating, I'll invite them to maybe do a little bit of tracking, writing it down, and not necessarily on like a food tracker that will have numbers, because that can be triggering, but more so just what they're eating throughout the day, because a lot of times we're eating a lot more than we think that we are, or
Yeah.
we tend to underestimate the amount of calories we're eating. And when we write it down, it's like, oh my gosh, I had a chocolate there, I had a chocolate there, I had a cupcake here. It's way more than I thought that I did. So that's one way. And there's actually even one specific app that I really like. It's called Rise Up in Recovery. And what that app does, it has you write down your food, but then also in conjunction with that, it has you write down, or I think you enter in your feeling or your emotion, or how you were feeling in that moment while you were eating that specific food, so we can really start to track the patterns that are coming up. When I had a cupcake, I felt sad. Or when I
Yeah.
had pizza, I felt happy. What are those different emotions that are correlated with the food that you're eating, and getting a better look at that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a really good. I think, yeah, that's a really great a bit of advice when you because what you're sort of saying. I think you're building connections to emotions to food, which then again that's a really important piece for people to realize.
Yeah, because when you think about it, the reason we do anything is because we want to achieve a certain emotional state.
Yeah,
And anything we do, we want to achieve a certain emotional state. So what are we going to do? What type of action are we going to do that's going to support our health the most in order to achieve that state? If we don't want to be eating cupcakes anymore, maybe there's a different way we can go about it to achieve comfort and self-soothe.
mm. And what are some of those, Colleen, that you've sort of? What are some of those? I'm really interested now in terms of those people wanting to feel this, and I completely agree. I think what you've said is absolutely magical. Is that people do anything to feel something? That's the reason we act in any way, and I love that. What are some of the things that you've then had clients swap or change, like that feeling of wanting to feel soothed, replacing that with, and I don't know what it would be, a walk in nature or something, because you're wanting to feel relaxed or something. How do we replace that?
Yeah, most of the time I'm finding that it's the connection piece that we're missing.
Yep.
When we're wanting to self-soothe with food, we're feeling disconnected, we're feeling alone, we're feeling unworthy, we're feeling bad about ourselves, and there's the part of us that comes up, the inner critic that pops up a lot. And I really encourage them to take a look at that. What is that part telling you, and what does that part need? And like I said, most of the time it's going to need connection. So that's when I will really encourage them, when they are feeling like they want to reach out for a specific food item to make them feel better. I would encourage them and invite them to maybe reach out to a friend, call a friend, or go meet up with a friend, or maybe connect with a counselor or therapist to
Yep.
talk about what is going on underneath. It's because it goes so deep.
Yeah, you've hit. I think you've really hit the nail on the head with that description of why people or why we do what we do, especially in what we said before, is that food becomes the conduit for everything emotional, good or bad. Like, when we celebrate, it's food. When we're upset, it's food. And what you're sort of doing is drawing the parallels or connecting them as terms of if you're needing soothing, it's food, but it could be something else, which is so important for us to realize. And do you think that, Colleen, do you think the obesity epidemic that we face, is that connecting a lot now to that fact that loneliness and disconnection physically, that community piece, something that I'm really passionate about, that we're sort of disconnecting from that, and we've got such a strong social connection, but it's not, the science is sort of saying it's not the same connections, it's not hitting the same buttons as it does when we've got physical connection or the feeling of emotional support. Do you think that's why obesity and our food decisions are not improving, even though we've got so much more food information?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're becoming more and more of a culture that we're just pushing everything down. We're not feeling our feelings. We're not communicating with how we feel to one another. We're not being vulnerable, and we're feeling more and more disconnected, which then, I think the reason, for the most part, like you said, we're struggling with obesity is because we're